Welcome back to Community IQ. And remember to engage and to encourage building up versus tearing down. Voices of our community, Community IQ. And with absolute pleasure today, introducing the Court of the Clerk, Mr. Gary Cooney. An absolute pleasure.
Good evening. Welcome back to Community IQ, here with the founder of this program, Garrett Bunnell. And tonight we've got a very special guest, one that we have worked very hard to get onto this program. Probably one of the busiest guys in Lake County, and I'm very honored to have him here with us tonight. Gary Cooney, Lake County Clerk of Courts. Gary,
Thanks for
welcome.
having me tonight. Yeah. I really appreciate being here. Nice to be here with Garrett and you, Bruce.
Yeah, we're going to have fun tonight, Gary. We're just going to talk about what made you what you are, and we're talking a little bit about what you do, your office, because we talked before, and Garrett and I had this conversation. What does the Clerk of Courts do? Nobody knows what you do, so we're going to let people know what you do and how it is that you got to be in a position to do what you do. So looking forward to tonight. Gary, first, tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Panama City in Bay Memorial Hospital. It's still there. One of my fellow clerks, oddly enough, the clerk of Collier County, was the accountant at Bay Memorial Hospital. Not when I was born, though, but right. She was accountant later in life. One of my other fellow clerks, the clerk of Bay County, was a fellow Little League player with me. So we have two clerks that came out of Bay County and one clerk that worked there. Right. But I was born there. I lived, grew up in a little town of Lynn Haven, just 7 miles north. It's the little town that got destroyed by Hurricane Michael a few years ago. Man. So born and raised right there.
So the birthplace of clerks. That's interesting.
It seems to be.
Yeah. They should put a plaque outside.
Something.
Something. Yeah, why not? And Gary, tell me a little bit about your household. Mom and dad are at the house, brothers, sisters.
Yeah, so I have obviously a mother and father. Everybody has one of those, right?
Right, yep.
Dad is an electrician working at a chemical plant. Dad was a World War II veteran, nose gunner on a B-17. Born in Waukegan, grew up in Chicago. Spent his summers on a grandparents' farm in Iowa. Have an interesting story about that. Probably won't get into it tonight, but I'll tell you. It's fun. Yeah. My mom was born right outside of Defuniak Springs on a farm. Birth attended to by midwife. Moved to Lynn Haven. Lived in basically a one-room house on a dirt road in Lynn Haven growing up. My grandfather actually helped build Liberty ships during World War II. My grandfather was born in the 1880s. My grandmother was born about 1890. Right. That era. So mom and dad, I have two sisters. The one sister is 7 years older, and the other sister is 14 years older than me. So two sisters. The one sister now lives in Alabama, the oldest. My other sister lives still in Panama City.
Right. Very, very similar. My father's parents were born in 1887 and 1888, so my grandparents too. So you and I are children of older parents.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
And I didn't say my mom. Growing up as a kid, my mom was the head cashier at the Piggly Wiggly in town.
That's fantastic.
And it was a town of, when I was growing up, about 1,500 people. So trust me, I couldn't get away with anything.
Yep. I can relate to that too. Growing up in Tavares in the 1960s and 70s, there was everybody knew the Duncan boys. Yeah, no doubt about it. So, Gary, your sisters, you say, are considerably older than you. Did they provide any kind of example to you, or were they that much older?
So my oldest sister, her name's Vera. Vera was so much older. By the time I came along and got old enough to realize Vera was actually kind of out of the house. She got married young. Yep. My other sister was the sister that always looked out after me. My parents both working. So if I'm a kid, I can remember one afternoon we were down at the local boat ramp on our bikes. Right. And because the boat ramp was nice and steep, but it was also nice and gravel. And I took my kneecaps both off, it seemed like that day. And my sister was the one that patched me back together. Yeah. So always an influence in my life, that sister in particular. Yeah. Still an influence in my life. Love her to death.
Right.
So fun household to grow up in. She always took care of me. They took care of us.
Right.
But yeah, so influence. The problem with that sister was when I'd go to elementary school, all my elementary school teachers had already had her, and you probably experienced this.
Right.
And they were like, "Why can't he be more like Debbie?" When they called my mother.
Right.
So.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I had both though. I had two of them that were fine examples of you, and then I had one that kind of broke the mold for me. So I was right after him, and so it was like, I hope you're not like your brother Scott and more like your brother Greg. So yeah, I got that a lot too. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. It's small town USA.
That's right,
and it really is. It's when we were kids, we thought, oh my gosh, I live in Mayberry, you know. But as we get older, at least I do, and I think you do too, listening to you, you appreciate the benefits of growing up in a small town where really everybody was your family.
That's correct.
You know, I mean, they all, like you said, looked out for you. Now, the difference was I had brothers. So if I'd have fallen and scraped my knees, they would have laughed, told me to rub some dirt on it and get back in the game, you know. But it's nice to have it. I never had a sister that kind of looked out for me like in that fashion, but they made sure that the big kids didn't beat me up, but you know, they made me try first.
And that really is a predominant theme in my life, which is it's always family. To this day, it's still family, whether it's blood relationships or other relationships that are still family.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, family first.
Yeah,
always.
That's right.
Yeah, and that, I mean, unfortunately, I think that still exists in some places, but it just doesn't seem to be as strong as it used to be, you know. And it was the concept that, you know, I can talk about my family, but you better not talk about my family.
That's
you know what I mean?
Correct.
And that was, I don't know that that's still prevalent today.
Yep.
But anyway, well, all right. So you're growing up in Lynn Haven.
Lynn Haven. Yep.
Yeah. And your mom and dad are instilling in you, what kind of values did they instill? What was important to them that Gary did in the community?
So we were laughing a little bit before the show, and I said, my dad always told me when I needed to get up.
Right.
So a good example of my father's very quiet, soft-spoken. My mom was the one who showed more emotion, if you will. When I'm emotional about something, I call it my inner Ethel coming out. My mom's name is Ethel. But my dad had a rule.
Yeah.
You didn't sleep past 7 o'clock at his house.
Right.
And it didn't matter if I was 5 or 25.
Right.
You get up at 7.
Right.
And, you know, when I'm in college and coming home and I'm visiting with my friends and my parents would say, we just need to know when you're going to be in.
Right.
At that age. So I'd say, well, I may get in about 11, 1. Okay, at 1 o'clock, we're going to start looking for you.
Right.
Next morning, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Get up.
Right.
Dad, I didn't get in till 1. I didn't tell you to stay out till 1. So so you had that, but you had loving parents that defended you, but they would find out if you were in the wrong first.
Correct. Yes.
So if you were honest with them and you were in the wrong, okay, well, we're going to fix that.
Right.
But if you were right, and they would stick up for you regardless.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Yeah. And again, that's it's us against the world mentality that you had when you were growing up as a family. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it didn't involve me, but my mom always told this great story about her brother, which is exact example of that, which is how it carried through. When they were younger in middle school, there was a fight on the middle school playground like boys will do.
Right.
And one of the boys in the fight threw something at the other boy and hit my mom instead.
Right.
So my uncle chased that boy home, chased him through his house.
Right.
Beat him up in the backyard of his house and then went back through and said hello to his mother because
that
was like the polite thing to do.
Yeah.
So, So.
Right. And she probably knew that her son deserved what he got. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's funny. That's great. That is great. Now, Gary, did y'all go to church as a family growing up?
We did.
Yeah.
Actually, I was raised in Pentecostal church.
Okay.
We called him Reverend Elder Brother Dr. J.W. Hunt.
Uh-huh.
Had a television show on Sunday mornings before church and had church on Sunday.
All right.
And one of the fun things about him, we had a very large church. A lot of people think of Pentecostal churches as small. We had about 2,000 members of our church.
Wow.
In in Springfield, Florida, just outside of Panama City. And so he would fill that church. Well, if you think about it from a political standpoint, what happens around election time, all the politicians want to.
Oh, yeah.
And he understood that. So he didn't want them coming in dribs and drabs. So he would pick a Sunday before election time and sit them in the choir loft and let them give their elevator speech.
Right.
And he'd say, now, if you want to come back to church and worship with us, you're welcome to have. But the next time you hit these doors, it's about the Lord and it's not about running.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great way to handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Now, you're a church that size, though. I always, I grew up in the church in Tavares, a Methodist church with probably 300 or 400 members.
Right.
And there would be, 3 different services, 100, 125 per service, maybe 200 on a good Sunday. Did you feel like you were part of the church family? I mean, did you feel surrounded by them?
We had 2,000 members, but all 2,000 were their own.
Oh, sure. Right.
So you had Sunday morning service, then you had Bible school, if you will, after Sunday morning, and then you had Sunday night service. And once again, it shows kind of how he thought a little bit ahead. He would ask other ministers in town if they would like to visit during one of their services. And the excuse they always gave was, well, we have our church services on Sunday and Wednesday too. Mm-hmm. And so he changed the services at our church to Thursday night instead of Wednesday night.
Right.
And so it was a Thursday night. We also had a youth group during the week that would meet, and I was part of that youth group.
Right.
So, yeah, you certainly felt like church family. Of course, we had dinner on the grounds.
Sure.
And then with that church, we had a big open-air building, kind of like a one-sided Butler building. And he would have camp meeting every year.
Right.
And so people from other Pentecostal churches around the Southeast would come to camp meeting. Until we built the new sanctuary, if you got baptized in that church, you got baptized in a pond on the grounds where the Butler building, I'm going to call it.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's funny. Yeah. Church on the grounds, boy, lunch, that's
dinner
where
on
you
the
learned
grounds.
whose house you wanted to go to for supper.
That's correct.
Well, Mrs. Jones makes the best dang fried chicken in Tavares. Right. So, come Sunday, I'm going to be around Ms. Jones's house. Yeah. So, yeah. No, dinner on the grounds, man, those are great. Softball games and all that good stuff. And again, that was that family that, you had your home family, you had your church family, you had your school family, you had your downtown family. And they all embraced you. And, I hate to use this term because it was a Hillary Clinton favorite, but it takes a village to raise a child. But that's true. I mean, we were raised by our parents, but we were also raised by the community.
So my mother had 3 brothers.
Yep.
My grandparents, who were born in the 1880s and 1890s, lived 4 blocks down the road from us, down a dirt road. We lived on a dirt road.
Yeah.
And my father's mother, my grandfather had already passed away by the time I came along. My father's mother lived right across the street.
Yep.
In a house my daddy built. And so we would go down to let me back up. So on Sunday morning before church, the grandmother across the street would cook pancakes, and my mother would cook bacon and eggs, and that was Sunday breakfast.
Right.
That same grandmother we went out to dinner with every Wednesday night.
Yeah.
The grandparents down the street, every Sunday afternoon, our family and the families of my 3 uncles on that side of the family would get together, and there's a lot of musicians in that family. And so we would have a big Sunday lunch, and then somebody would eventually break out a fiddle and a guitar and spoons and a banjo,
right,
an electric guitar, and they would all play.
Right.
And so it was, you have to understand the size of this family. One of those uncles had 11 children.
Right.
Another one had 4.
Right.
The other one had 5.
Right.
So
yep.
So it's all of us in this little house. And,
yep.
And just enjoying each other.
That is of course I'm little, but you grew up in Florida, and people don't ever think of Florida as the South.
No.
Yeah, that really irritates me because we have a lot of outside influence in Florida. There's no doubt about it. And you're from a pocket in Florida. The Panhandle is truly Southern. I mean, Panama, Redneck Riviera, and the azaleas and the dogwood, even the landscaping up there is still consistent with the South. When you get down more into the tropics like this, people just refuse to accept this part of Florida as the South. But I can assure you that back in the 60s and 50s and 40s, when my parents were growing up and my family came here in 1800s to Lake County, it was the South.
That's right.
And we had very Southern principles and food and cultures and exactly what you're describing right there. The old gatherings at the house with the music and the Sunday after church,
That's right.
Meals and all that kind of stuff like that. So it's good to hear that you experienced the same things that I did back then. And it continues to change. I was riding the other week, and I saw a bumper sticker on the back of a pickup truck that I absolutely adored. It said, "Don't New York up my Florida." and of course, right now we're going through an influx of that. Again, a second really influx of Northern friends moving into Florida. And Florida has lost its Southern culture, unfortunately. Yeah.
Now, Lynn Haven growing up is, when it was founded by Mr. Lynn, which got his name, Lynn Haven.
Right.
It's the only town, when I was growing up there, and maybe it's changed over the years, but at the time when I was growing up there, only town south of the Mason-Dixon line that had a statue to a Union foot soldier.
Right.
Because Mr. Lynn put it there.
Yeah.
Because he was from up north.
He was from up north. Yeah.
So
I bet he was very popular in town when he did that.
He actually was. It was fine. Nobody cared. Because foot soldier,
Right.
And
I understand.
those guys did what they did, and that's how it goes. So.
Right. It's military.
Yeah.
And appreciate the honor. So Gary, you've got a strong family. You've got a church background, religious faith that's being instilled into you by this family that you raised. Now, at some point in time, I'm sure your parents are encouraging you to do well in school.
That was the job, and that's what we've told our kids.
Right.
Your education, as you're living at home, your job is your education. Now, having said that, my father and my mother expected you to work for what you had. So, and this is kind of a fun fact about me. I still have my high school truck. Mm-hmm. And my daddy bought that truck in 1965.
Right.
I'm just about 5 years old, August 65. And he brought it home, and that was his work truck. And then when I got ready to high school, he took my mom's old car, got her a new car, and gave me the truck to drive to school.
Right.
But if I was going to drive the truck to school, I had to have a job because I needed to put gas in it and do some other stuff. And so my first job was building toys at the toy store in the mall.
Right. Wow.
So, but the primary job was to get all my schoolwork done.
Right.
And so, so my father, like I say, born in Waukegan, just outside of Chicago, gets put into World War II, goes through pilot training in Danville, Kentucky. But my father never graduated. He went to Center College, but he never graduated from college. My mother is a high school graduate, and that's it.
Right.
My two older sisters never wanted to go to college, which was fine. Mm-hmm. But my parents had this notion for me to go to college.
Right.
And I know most people are going to think this is crazy. If you think about the Will Smith movie, I, Robot, where he's talking about the little girl that drowned, and he has her bracelet that says dentist. And he says, what 7-year-old wants to be a dentist?
Right, yeah.
So for me, it was, what 14-year-old wants to be a lawyer?
Right.
And so I've had that desire. And so my parents said, we're going to help you work toward that desire.
Right. Well, I mean, it's fascinating. And it similar, I remember telling my mother at 12 years old, I'm going to be a lawyer. And she said, you'll change your mind.
Right.
But I think that's probably what put that resolve into me that I'm going to be a lawyer no matter what, because, she doubted me. But, no, it is, and I don't know where it came from. Different than what you just said. My parents were both college educated, graduated. All four of my grandparents were graduates from college, which is extremely unusual back in those days. So, I mean, college was not a choice. It wasn't an option to not go to college in my family.
So I have unusual role models. So the grandparents that were born in the 1880s, 1890s, my grandmother never went to school. Her father put her in the field behind a plow. Ooh. And this is an old-fashioned plow that you wrote with the reins around your neck.
Yoke. Yeah.
And so she had a hunchback from that. Mm-hmm. And so completely illiterate, but a memory like you wouldn't believe. You did not play concentration with a deck of cards with her.
Yeah.
because you are not going to get any. My grandfather only went through 3rd grade.
Right.
My father's mother, born in 1900,
Right.
Born December 31st of 1900, college educated.
Right.
So I had this interesting dichotomy,
Right.
grandparents, and I learned so much from both.
Yes.
The one set of grandparents very poor, the other one's college educated and not wealthy by any stretch.
Right.
And that grandmother finally retired at age 92.
Wow.
She stopped working at 92.
Yeah. So, and that's the work ethic.
That's the work
That's
ethic.
the fourth component.
Correct.
That you get it from somewhere.
That's right.
And so that's fast. So where did you go to school?
So undergraduate degree from Stetson University. I have an undergraduate degree in accounting.
Right.
At the time I went to Stetson, it was the only school its size that was recruited by all the Big Eight. And for those who are younger than us, the Big Eight were the largest 8 accounting firms in the world
Right.
at the time. And then my law degree is from University of Florida.
Right.
Just like you.
Yeah.
So I went to Florida for law school, graduated from law school, and my parents were not wealthy parents. As I described them, my dad was an electrician in a chemical plant. My mom was a grocery store cashier, but she did not want me to be saddled with debt.
Right.
And so they made it, they paid for my college.
Right.
But my mom, upon graduation, said, "Congratulations, son. It's an honor. You owe me $110,000. So, it's my son actually described it best, and we haven't talked about any of my kids, but my son actually described it best a few years ago. He said to me, Dad, I finally realized your children all grew up privileged, but did not grow up entitled.
That's right.
And so I'm privileged to have the parents and upbringing that I had.
Right.
And I learned from all those things, and I also learned from other members of the family what not to do.
That's right.
One of my uncles was a smoker and died for cancer. I've never touched a cigarette.
Right.
One of my uncles was a pretty heavy drinker. I don't drink. So you also learn from other examples in your life.
Yep. And it's interesting. A lot of times when you see that, Gary, you can go both ways.
That's right.
I mean, I want to be like my uncle, so I'm going to learn to drink and smoke and be heavy. So, I mean, you were smart enough to see the negative impacts of those habits and able to avoid them. So that says a lot about you too. Not only your uncles, but it says a lot about you too. Yeah.
I knew I'd get a beating if I followed the other two.
Yeah. I can understand that. Now, your wife, who is currently a judge with Lake County, just became a judge last January, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
She also is a lawyer. Where did you and Carla meet?
We met in law school.
Okay.
So she was my legal research and writing instructor. So if you remember, in our days at UF, I don't know if they still do it, at law school, they put you in 2 different sections, 100 in each section, alphabetically.
Right.
And so my best friend in law school is a guy who got kicked out of Cuba as a boy. His name is Raul Cuervo, one of the smartest human beings you'll ever meet in your life.
Right.
And Raul and I sat next to each other in legal research and writing. And I said, the legal research and writing instructor is kind of nice. And he goes, well, why don't you ask her out?
Right.
And so I did. And so we dated a little bit. She is ahead of me because she's smarter than I am.
Right.
And so she finished her undergrad quicker than I finished mine. She finished law school quicker than I finished mine. So she was out already. And we actually got engaged the day she got sworn into the bar.
Right.
So we met there. And she took a job with Cawthon, Robick & Hennings,
right.
the old Cawthon, Robick & Hennings firm here in Tavares. And so I commuted back and forth to law school. I had an apartment there during the week and would live here on the weekends. And then when I started my work life, I actually started working in Orlando, but we lived here. We lived in Tavares in those condos on Caroline Street.
Right. Yeah. Well, Carla, your wife, had a tie to Lake County. Her parents, I believe her father was a professor at Lake Sumter. Because I went to school with her sister.
That's correct.
Kara, at graduate in Tavares with her sister, and I think her father was with Lake Sumter.
They were, so Carla was born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Home of the Little League World Series.
That's right.
Her father was a professor at Bucknell University.
Right.
And then retired from that job up there and came down. Her grandparents had a home, a summer home in, I guess a winter home, summer home for them in Tavares, just around the corner from what's now Fish Camp Restaurant,
right
near the old waterfront.
Yep.
And so she started looking at colleges, and she looked at Rollins. And so she went to Rollins undergrad. And so she went to college, and they moved to Mount Dora, at the same time.
Yep.
And so she started at Rollins and then stayed here, went to UF, just like I did, obviously.
Yep.
But you're right. Her dad became a professor at Lake Sumter when he moved down here.
And that's how you ended up back in Lake County because
that's correct.
Of her family. She took the job at Cawthon Roebuck Henning. So we have Kara to thank for that. Yes,
that's correct. Or to blame, whichever you prefer.
That's correct. Well, I prefer to say thank you because no, it's been an honor to know you and get to meet you years ago. So you eventually take a job as the judicial clerk for all of the judges for Lake County.
Yeah, I come back to Lake County and work at Williams Smith & Summers. Mm-hmm. And Mark Hill had become a friend of mine because Carla and Mark were in practice. Mm-hmm. And Mark went on to become county judge and circuit judge.
Right.
And so there was a law clerk position that had been started by the Supreme Court, and Mary McDaniel had that position.
Right.
And she was the clerk for Welborn.
Yes.
Daniel. And Welborn got elevated to the 5th DCA, and they were looking for a new law clerk. And Mark came to me and said, why don't you come over and do this?
Right.
And I went to interview with Judge Alls, and it was the most interesting interview you ever want to have. Judge Alls said, I don't believe in this law clerk program, but the court tells us we have to have one.
Right.
Judge Hill says you're okay, you're hired. So, and told me he'd never use me, but we ended up being having a mentor relationship and a lifelong friendship. And I miss him to this day.
Yes, I think a lot of us do, and we could do an entire show on Judge Buddy, but we won't start in on that. It's funny. My very first job in a law firm was at Cawthon Roebuck and Hennings. I still believe that's the only law firm in the state of Florida that's got a swimming pool at the
That's correct.
Yeah, but I clerked for David and Dan back in summer of 1985. I want to say was my first, and Mark was still there, and I think Carla was still there, and Michelle Morley was there. I mean, so they trained a lot of
Butch Blanchard.
Butch Blanchard was there.
That's right.
Gordon Oldham was there of counsel.
That's
Red
right.
Boylston was
right.
there. So, I mean, you look at that law firm produced a lot of judges and a lot of quality lawyers over the years.
And I clerked for Billy in the summer.
Right.
After we got married.
Yeah.
I poured concrete in the summer before we got married at the chemical plant.
Right. Yeah.
But once you got married, you couldn't work at the plant anymore. So I clerked for Billy.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. No, it was an interesting law firm right downtown Tavares. And of course, Dan Roebuck's still practicing around here, and David Cawthon's still practicing around here. Richard Hennings is at the retirement home for lawyers there on with Buzzy Bowen and all those guys.
But
so
he was in the courthouse yesterday, though.
Was he?
So he can't quite retire again.
Yeah, no, they can't ever give it up. Del Potter's over there. I mean, all the old guys, Mordall's Buddy's brother. So yeah, all those old guys are over there hanging out with each other. Can't hear each other, but it's still fun to be around them. All right, so Gary, what led you? Now you work for the city of Mount Dora as city attorney. We won't go into that, but I mean, you've had a lot of really cool jobs as an attorney. But at some point in time, you go to work for Neil Kelly.
That's right.
Yeah, who was the clerk of courts.
Correct,
Yeah.
and I think Jennifer Hill is to blame for that.
Right.
If anybody wants to blame anybody.
Yeah.
So Jennifer was on the county commission.
Mm-hmm.
Neil was looking for a lawyer and someone to take over overseeing courts. He had Scott Rotai, and Scott had left.
Mm-hmm.
And Neil, I guess, was lamenting that he needed somebody, and Jennifer Hill said, you need to call Gary Cooney. And Neil and I had been friends forever. In fact, Neil's wife, Sharon, babysat our son, Tyler.
Right.
So little Neil and Tyler grew up together. And Neil said, as the story goes, Neil said to Jennifer, I can't afford Gary Cooney. And Jennifer replied, Gary Cooney doesn't care about the money, Neil. He cares about the job.
Right.
And so Neil approached me, and we had a series of conversations, and it sounded like a good thing to do. I wanted to be in Lake County. I wanted to serve the folks of Lake County in that capacity. Mm-hmm. Neil hired me. I started to work for Neil in 2011, and had a wonderful relationship with Neil. To this day, I would still tell Neil if he wanted to still be clerk, I'd be happy being right where I was.
Yeah.
And Neil decided he wanted to step away, and I ran. So.
Yep. Now, we laughed before this interview, and Garrett and I've had this conversation. Everybody knows what the sheriff does, and everybody knows what the tax collector does, and the property appraiser and the supervisor of elections, all of our other constitutional officers, but nobody knows what the clerk of courts does. So tell us, in a couple of minutes, tell us what the clerk of courts does for the citizens of Lake County.
So I have 5 constitutional duties. Mm-hmm. So I'm the secretary for the Board of County Commissioners.
Right.
I am the internal auditor for the Board of County Commissioners. I'm the comptroller. So the official title in the statute is the clerk of the circuit court and comptroller. Mm-hmm. I'm the comptroller for the county, which means I'm the chief financial officer for the county. I am also the official record keeper for the county, so I do the official records, the OR books. And those records go back to when your great-grandfather was the clerk. And we go back a little further because we came from Orange County and Sumter County, so we actually have our records back right now to 1884.
Right.
But I'm also the clerk of the court.
Yep.
And it's interesting, the job description in an earlier constitution than we have now used to say that I was the clerk of the circuit court and the clerk of the county court, and that was changed to just the clerk of the circuit court. And the county court is actually a separate part of the statute. It's Chapter 34. Mm-hmm. And I am, by legislative designation, the clerk of the county court also.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, the people interact with the clerk of the courts primarily, in my opinion, in 2 ways. That is, you get your jury summons from the clerk of the court. When you get summoned to appear in front and serve as a juror, it comes from the clerk of the court. And the second reason is whenever you buy or sell a piece of property, you have to record the deed with the clerk of the courts. And that's what when you say OR book and page number, every deed that you've ever had in your life has the OR book and page number on top of it. And you're responsible for managing those official records that come through the county. So that probably typical individuals or citizens in Lake County, that would be their 2 primary interactions with the court. Unless you're a lawyer and you're filing a lot of lawsuits or you're involved in lawsuits, that kind of thing like that. But I think
on the court side, I call it, we have our happy customers.
Right.
And we have our customers who probably aren't real happy.
Right.
The medium on the fence people are the jurors.
Right. Yes.
So every week I send out summons. In a given year, I'll send out 30,000 summons.
Right.
So almost a tenth of the population.
That's right.
Of the county. We typically see them on Monday. So yesterday I had a bunch of folks staring at me while I was swearing them in.
Right.
And then we have the folks who have to come to us for all manner of reasons. You have divorces and crimes and traffic tickets and those kinds of things, which are kind of not happy customers to be with us.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have the folks who just bought a house.
Yes.
We have the folks who want to get a passport. We have the folks who want to get a marriage license. And those are our typically happy customers.
Right.
I say I issue marriage licenses on one side of the house and marriage unlicenses on the other.
That's correct.
So it's a lot of folks see us.
Right.
And I'm intertwined. I know you've talked to all the other constitutional officers. I'm intertwined with all the other constitutionals, which is I'm the only one of the 5 of us that by job description and legislation has to interact with all the other constitutionals.
That's right. Yep. It really is a fascinating position, and it's nobody knows what it is that you do unless, again, as a lawyer, of course, I know a lot about what the clerk does, but I had to deal with the clerk all the time. And for years, I think James Watkins was the clerk when I first started practicing law, and really there haven't been a lot of them.
So we started with your great-grandfather.
Right.
So he became clerk in 1887, part of the legislature that created Lake County.
That's right.
Was then appointed clerk. He stayed in office until he passed away.
Yep.
He died in office. So he died in 1920.
Yep.
The next clerk is T.C. Smith.
Yep.
which usually was the sheriff when
Correct.
your grandfather,
Yes.
your great-grandfather passed away.
Yep.
But wanted a raise, and the clerk made more back then. So TC became the clerk.
Right.
He served until 1927.
Right.
TC stepped away from office in 27. Monroe Simpson, who was a merchant in downtown Mount Dora, took over from 27 to 29.
Right.
And that's all he wanted.
Yep.
1929, we got George Dykes.
That's right.
Okay. So George Dykes serves from 29 to 53.
Right.
From 1953 to 1973, we have Frank Owens.
Yes.
And then from 73 to 2007, we have Jim Watkins.
That's right.
And I always kid Jim. I say, this clerk's office has been running like a top since 1974. And he says, I took office in 73. And I said, I know you did. It took you a while to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Neil takes over in 2007.
Yep.
And steps away in 18. And I'm the 8th clerk.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about that, the history of Lake County, 1887 was when Lake County became a county. So that's 120 some odd years ago. And there have been 8 clerks of court in 120 something years. That's absolutely amazing.
But most of them was your
Yeah.
great grandfather and Jim.
So, yeah, exactly. 33 years each, as a matter of fact. I think Jim served a little bit longer than HH did. He wanted that distinction.
I think so.
And that's fine. Not a nicer guy to take that distinction. So that's 66 years between the two of them, 67 years. So, I mean, it really is, when you think about how many sheriffs we've had and how many tax collectors we've had and supervisors, of course, Imogene ate up a big period of that. But yeah, so it really is pretty cool that and I guess it's because that we've been very lucky with some very good tax collectors. And hopefully, Gary, you'll serve 33 years. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about that.
But,
But one of the cool things about the office for me is, so I have a book, and I actually have it in my personal office because I like the book so much. And it's one of the obscure duties that your great-grandfather had, and that duty carried on until around World War II.
Right.
Was he had to record every cow ear clipping and livestock ear clipping,
Right.
and every brand in the county.
Yes.
And so if you want to come over and look at that book, it's called the Marks and Brands book.
Right.
And it's in your great-grandfather's handwriting.
That's right. Yeah. A lot of the deeds and everything were done by hand.
Right.
And he wrote a lot of those things back then. And he also signed the hanging warrants.
Correct.
Yeah. So he oversaw and there were hangings right downtown in Tavares behind the historic courthouse. And he oversaw those.
And the legend is that T.C. Smith was the only clerk of court to ever hang someone under a warrant.
Right.
Because the sheriff that took over was his undersheriff.
That's right.
And the last hanging in Lake County was 1927.
Yes.
And supposedly when the picture was taken on the gallows, the former undersheriff, now the sheriff, leaned over to his former boss, who was the clerk of the court, and said, I don't think I can do this. And he said, you don't think you can do what? And he said, I don't think I can pull this lever. I've never killed anybody. To which TC replied, there's nothing to it, and pulled the lever. So, yeah. So not only, I guess, did he sign them, he may have carried one out.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah. So, Gary, we talked a lot. We know what you do. We know where you came from. Let's talk about your kids, because you've got some amazing kids. And I know you well enough to know you can talk about your kids for half an hour, but give us 5 minutes, because your kids deserve recognition for what they've done. They're amazing, amazing young people. Yeah. So talk about your kids a little bit.
So, and I love my children. I mean,
yes, you do.
Carla and I will both tell you that our kids are the best thing we've ever done.
Right.
So our firstborn is Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler is a graduate of the University of South, Swanee, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler holds, I'll tell you a couple fun facts about Tyler. He holds his high school and college pole vault record. Mm-hmm. Tyler was a track athlete. All our kids were runners and track athletes. Tyler is currently a paramedic in Charleston, South Carolina, and a Marine Corps captain.
Mm-hmm. So
Tyler has served for a year in Okinawa as executive officer of the Jungle Warfare Training Center for the Marine Corps. And Tyler is never one to he's like us. He has a work ethic, and he likes, for the members of his unit, they become a family. For members of his platoon, they become a family. So even though he could have sat in an office, he did the training course with them when they were doing it. Yeah. So we get a text. I get a text one day, and it's simply a picture of obviously someone from the training center's face, and this is someone we don't know. And he has a stitch that runs from his left nostril to his lip that has been sewn up. And and so I text back and I say, I don't understand what this picture is. And Tyler says, well, I sewed this guy up out in the field today. Right. And I said, where's your Navy corpsman? And he said, it is the Navy corpsman. He hit himself in the mouth with his gun. So it's always those kind of things that he's just willing to do.
Right. Yeah.
And so for his service at the Jungle Warfare Training Center, his CO told him he got something that he hadn't seen in his career. He ended up with 2 naval commendations at the Warfare Training Center. And then Tyler came back home, and Tyler's in the reserves. And if you're in the reserves, you can go on the Marine Corps website and you can look for active duty posts. And so Tyler called us and he said, I've signed up for my next active duty posting. And we said, what's that? And he said, I'm going to be sent to the western deserts of Iraq to fight ISIS. Right. Because that's Tyler.
Yep.
So Tyler, his next sibling in line will tell you, has this burning desire to serve people. And that manifests itself in serving the country, serving the folks who need help from a paramedic. He has always, Tyler was the head of the only volunteer service, EMS service in the state of Tennessee.
Right.
So he has that burning desire to this day. He served in the western deserts of Iraq. We actually got an unusual communication from him one night, and his mama, who didn't like to get this communication, said, this isn't your shift. Why are you up? And he said, well, ISIS killed one of our guys today, and we've been in a running gun battle all night killing them back. So that's Tyler. Yeah. So our middle daughter, Jordan, swore up and down that she was not going to follow her older brother to the University of the South. And when our kids were selecting colleges, we had a process for that. Mm-hmm. It was, we want you to pick 3 schools you can get into, 3 schools that you should be able to get into, and 3 schools that are reach schools. Mm-hmm. So Jordan held at one time the 200 record at Christian Home and Bible, mm-hmm. Which was broken a few years later by obviously a faster young lady, a real sweet young lady. But Jordan was Christian Home and Bible's first National Merit Scholar. Jordan graduated early because she skipped a year when she was at Montessori School in Leesburg. Mm-hmm. So Jordan graduated from high school early, headed to college early. Jordan applied to numerous colleges, which reduced our bank account. And we looked at a lot of them and got accepted every place she applied. And ultimately, Jordan fell in love with Swanee because it was family. And when Jordan and I were touring schools, the guidance counselor, if you will, the admissions director, I guess, at Brown University, said, I'll tell you how to pick a college. Go out there and stand in the quad, and if it feels right, apply, and if it doesn't, don't. And so she said, I won't be applying to Brown. Right. Jordan got into Bryn Mawr. She got into Carleton. Bryn Mawr is the university that graduates more women doctors than any other college in the United States. It graduates more doctors than any other college in the United States other than MIT. She got into Carleton. It's the 4th ranked college in the country. But she had a desire for what she felt, and what she felt was Swanee. Mm-hmm. All of our children have dual degrees. I'll get that up front. Right. Jordan has dual degrees in religion and chemistry.
Right.
All right, so a little bit of a quirk. Jordan has a master's degree in medical science, and she has an MD, and her specialty is OBGYN, and she is a 4th-year resident in Pittsburgh at McGee Women's Hospital. And that brings us to the child who's probably most like me. It brings me to Madison, and you probably know Madison the best of all my kids. Right. So Madison always wanted to be a lawyer. And so Madison absolutely said she was not following in her two older siblings' footsteps. And we toured a lot of colleges, and Madison fell in love, oddly enough, with her grandfather's alma mater, Bucknell University. And so Madison attended Bucknell, dual degrees in English and psychology. Madison married her high school sweetheart. Let me back up. I'll get to the grandkids in a minute. Yeah. So Madison married her high school sweetheart, Daniel, and Daniel is an Air Force Academy graduate. And so coming out of college, they didn't know where Daniel was going to be stationed. Based on his MOS, which is Military Operational Specialty, there were only 6 choices in the U.S.
Right.
And so Madison applied to and got into every law school within driving distance of those 6 choices.
Right.
He was ultimately assigned to Moody, which is in Valdosta. They live in Thomasville, Georgia. And Madison commuted in every day to FSU. So Madison recently graduated from FSU with a law degree. She took the bar exam this fall. And Madison will find out those results in a couple weeks.
Any day.
Any day, yeah. So I've told you about my children.
Right.
But those 2 daughters have given me grandchildren.
Right.
Madison gave me our first grandchild, or gave us our first grandchild, almost 2 years ago, next month. So we're going up for that birthday celebration in a few weeks. Her name is Susanna,
right.
And she is just like her mama. She's a pistol,
right?
as my folks would say.
Yeah.
And Delight. And then 3 months after Susanna, Jordan gave us our first grandson. Sweetest little boy you ever wanted to meet. His name's Cooper.
Right.
And Cooper lives in Pittsburgh. We don't get to see him as much as we would like because of COVID and everything else. We were there for the births of both grandchildren.
Yep.
And we FaceTime with Cooper almost every night. We FaceTime with Susanna most nights.
Right.
And, that's fun. Jordan obviously is married to a nice young man, Stephen.
Yep.
And they live in Pittsburgh. So.
Well, I wish that our listeners could see your face light up when you talk about your kids. And I warned you that when I asked him about the kids, it was going to be, but I mean, the level of pride and joy that you have in your children, Gary, is it warms my heart. And you have every right to have that pride and joy. I mean, your children are amazing, and I'm glad you had the opportunity to talk about them a little bit tonight. Now, grandchildren, I refuse to accept that you have grandchildren because that makes me old. So, but I'm glad that you've got an opportunity to talk about them. Gary, I'm gonna finish with one question.
Before you do,
yep.
I would be remiss.
Yeah.
We talked about family.
Yeah.
So I will tell you this, Bruce, you're part of my family.
I appreciate that.
You've been a friend of mine for years and years.
Yeah.
But I have this other family. It's called the Clerk family.
Yes.
And you've been around long enough. That's Jim Watkins.
Yes.
He created a Clerk family.
Yes.
Neil Kelly shepherded that Clerk family.
Yep.
And I'm continuing to be the shepherd of that family.
Yep.
And that's how you're treated if you're at my
Yep.
office. If you're a stranger off the street, you get treated with respect. We expect you to treat us with respect, but we're going to treat you with all the respect that we can. And it's because we're a family.
That's right. And that's what we were raised in. That you, like we talked about 30 minutes ago, you had your immediate family, but you also had your church family, you had your school family, you had your community family, and you've got your work family.
That's right.
And you're right, Gary. You do foster an incredible atmosphere there at the clerk's office. And we're lucky to have you serving in that capacity.
Well, I'm lucky to be in that capacity. It's not work. I love doing it. I'm at the office every morning at about 7:15. I leave every day about 5:15, 5:30.
Yep.
I've never had a bad day at the office. I've had
get their
unpleasant
money's
things that I had to do during the day. Never had a bad day.
Yeah.
And it's because the atmosphere Jim created that Neil kept going that I hope to keep going. So.
Yeah. Gary, here's your last question today.
All right.
10, 20, 15, whatever, how many years from now you retire and they're at your retirement party and somebody steps up to summarize Gary Cooney, what do you want them to say?
And we talked about Judge Alls earlier.
Yeah.
So I want them to say the one thing that sticks out in mind for me that Judge Alls taught me That's you can tell the character of an individual, how they treat somebody that can do them no harm.
Yes.
And I want people to say about me,
yep,
he treated me with love and respect. Even, you know, when I do interviews, I ask interview candidates, I explain to them what we expect. Our customers are the folks who may have made a mistake and maybe didn't, but are sitting over in that jail. And our folks are the customers whose mama's wanting them out of that jail.
Right.
And that guy in that jail can't hurt Gary Cooney, the clerk, one iota.
Right.
But he deserves to be treated like the human being that he or she is. He deserves to be treated with respect. We don't know their circumstances. They can't do damage to me.
Right.
And we need to have the character in that office. And I need to have the character in that office to instill in everybody that that's how we treat people. That you know, God made us this family of human beings.
Right.
And that's how we need to treat each other.
Yeah. Fantastic, Gary. I mean, it's a great sentiment. And what a fine tribute it'll be the day that somebody acknowledges that's how you lived your life. Yeah. So thank you, Gary. I mean, it's been a very quick hour. I think we've been talking for close to an hour, and it's gone by like nothing. So I look forward to putting this out there for everybody to hear on YouTube. And, you know, all you got to do is go to YouTube, type in Community IQ, and the whole list of them will come up, and you can listen to whatever you want to. Garrett does some interesting, fantastic interviews with some of the citizens of Lake County. So really is a fun thing that we have a good time with here. And thanks so much for
Thank you so
up,
much
Garrett.
for having me. This was so much fun.
Appreciate it. Yep. And God bless you and your family as well.
Thank you. And Garrett, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.